The mere thought of mixing with African villagers, tramping through pristine wilderness, and the stimulus of remote chances of danger, either from beasts or men, excites me. Now, if I'd written that in my journal, you would no doubt think I was terribly pretentious and a little insane. But for me, there are surviving elements to that statement. Nothing really became of me at uni, other than discovering Jack Daniels and Coke. But I scraped a 2-1 degree in my joint honours, and most importantly, my partner-to-be, Rian, sitting rather nervously on the back over there. But as many people feel after uni, you either want to get stuck in straight away, or you want to do a bit of a gap year or whatever. And I didn't want to do a gap year, but as I say, that bug had remained within me since those first visits to Africa. So I thought I really wanted to do something like that and go out just for a couple of months and do a bit of travelling, really. Looking back on it, I went with a couple of friends, Michael and Amy, and looking back on it, we were completely and utterly unprepared. So don't follow, if anyone wants to do that, this is not the way to do it. But we just had a few American dollars tucked away in different places to sort of get us from A to B, and a scruffy old guidebook. This was in fact our route. This was back in 2006. This was our route going from South Africa, flying up to Victoria Falls up here on the Zimbabwe-Zambia border, and then making our way through using public transport all the way up to Lake Tanganyika, which is this big expanse of water here, and then going up via a ferry, doing a few things around there, and then across Tanzania and to the Indian Ocean here at Dar es Salaam. That was the start of as much as we planned, really, and then the rest of it was going to be what we feel like doing in the end. In actual fact, my great love was to try and follow some of the steps of Stanley and Livingstone, which in fact we managed to do most of the way. Livingstone to meet Stanley up here. Livingstone started over here in Malawi, or Nyasa as he called it back then, and came up here to a place called Ujiji, which is just there. And then Stanley made it from Dar es Salaam across here using exactly the same route, and they met at, as I say, at Ujiji. So that was the sort of plan. We made it to Victoria Falls without incident. And has anyone been to Victoria Falls here? No? And I mean, you just cannot imagine the beauty of it. I'm sure you've all seen the natural history films and things with it on, but it's just it's unbelievable. You just cannot. It's breathtaking, literally. And I would like to show you just a small clip in a mo about the stuff I'm going to talk about. So I will show you it in a minute. But they call it actually Musi Utunya, which means the smoke that thunders. And thunder, I mean, it certainly does thunder. It's incredible. Actually, I remember seeing the first view of this smoke. You could hear it, but you could see it as well, rising up like a big sort of column in the air. And I remember seeing that when we got stopped by the Zimbabwe authorities, which basically big men with bigger rifles. I don't have any footage of that, I'm afraid, because being British and in Zimbabwe, it was probably not advisable to let them know I had filming equipment on me. Although I'd gone to Africa to see, photograph and film the wildlife, it became more and more clear to me that actually the people were just as exciting and interesting. The buzz and general interest one I suppose exhibits and creates when you're walking around just doing your thing with a lot of the locals is quite extraordinary, especially in some of the more remote parts, which you are when you're going up through the Great Lakes. There weren't any tourists that I saw anyway. And I suppose it can get quite intimidating and maybe even tiresome at points. But I found it really quite rewarding, showing people our equipment and sharing our food with them, and then them in turn taking us back to their houses and sharing their accommodation and their food with us. Anyway, we carried on from Victoria Falls across the Zambezi and north through Zambia, stopping at villages and towns on our way. We were heading to Zambia's only port, which is rather romantic name, Umpulungu. In fact, the north of the country, as I was saying, poor people, really very, very poor and desolate indeed. The only people that actually make any money up there is the mobile phone companies, because they've flogged all of these phones and these contracts to all these very desperately poor people. But because there's so many of them, they can afford to sell them for a few pence. I suppose it's fairly tough on the heartstrings, and you find yourself feeling guilty, which of course you shouldn't. Fortunate and lucky, yes, but not guilty. This is what we were often being offered for a sort of snack. Can anyone tell me? Does anyone know what those are? Hazard a guess? Yes. Nope. No. They are curled up. I can see that. But no, they're actually catfish. Catfish, yeah, barbecue catfish. Rather well done by the looks of things. Yeah, so I suppose, I mean, everything that's sort of modern day and for your own comfort just goes out the window there, because, I mean, anything to do with money just seems totally ridiculous when you're surrounded by these people. Of course, all their character and their dress is incredibly colourful, but they are very, very poor. Umpulungu is where the oldest working ferry in the world docks on its southernmost point up and down Lake Tanganyika. So that's what we're trying to catch. And it's an absolute miracle of a boat, and I say miracle because it's a miracle that it's still afloat, let alone plying the lake with the trade and goods and people. Yeah, it's a very old steamboat. What actually happened was it was built by the Germans in the war, and then it was scuttled by them, sunk to the bottom of the lake, and then resurrected, very colonial, resurrected by the British and put back into service. So yes, our lives depended on that, really. So that goes all the way up to, it takes 5 days to get from the bottom of Lake Tanganyika all the way up to the top, to the border of Burundi, a place called Kigoma. And it stops at sort of about, I think it's about 15 ports or places along the way, but actually it doesn't really stop. The villages it doesn't go to the villages actually come to the Liemba. And it just sounds its horn, and everyone goes out on their little boats and scoots off up to it, and then trades and gets on board or takes goods off or whatever. So it's a real lifeline for many hundreds of miles, for many thousands of people. It's the only real piece of technology that exists up there. It was just as well, we were actually only on it for 2 days. I put here because we had wildlife to find, but that's a bit pretentious. It was just as well, really, because our cabin was literally, as you'll see in the video, crawling with cockroaches, absolutely infested with them. So it was quite difficult to get a good night's sleep, really, because you're invariably disturbed by the goats and the chickens and everything that were roaming around the deck, which are obviously the goods and things, and then all the cockroaches scuttling over your face in the middle of the night. And if that didn't, make you stir from your sleep, the ship's horn definitely would when it called at all these ports. Although I must give one sort of outstanding commendation here for the toilet system, because we didn't want to use Imodium on the trip at all, because we'd already had all our anti-malarials and things, so we didn't want to pump our guts full of drugs more than we had to. But we didn't really need to, because the ship has got an excellent toilet system, whereby in your ensuite cabin, you go into the toilet and you open the door, and then one look and one sniff, and you refuse to use it for the entirety of the trip thereafter. We felt very colonial, as I say, sort of steaming up the lake. We go out on the life jackets. Actually, we ended up sleeping outside on deck on the life jackets and watching the stars go by. And there were forest fires in the Congo to the west, and then the hills of Tanzania to the east. Anyway. We eventually reached our destination, which was the Mahale Mountains. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Mahale Mountains, but I remember when I was about 7, again in America, a friend said, "Would you like to come and play on my Sega Mega Drive?" And I said, no, I'm just off to meet Dr. Goodall, which he didn't understand at all. But Dr. Jane Goodall is, of course, a world of authority on chimpanzees and their behaviour. And she did a lot of her work and continues to do so at a place called Gombe Stream, which is just up the lake. And there are chimps that are studied in the Mahale Mountains as well, but they're not as well known as the sort of celebrity chimps up in Gombe. That's probably because you had to use the bloody Leander to get there. It's Mahale Mountains is a largely impenetrable sort of forest reserve. Unfortunately, I had food poisoning and I was bedbound for about 24 hours. I was awoken in my tent, the cabin in the mountains themselves, by strange way to be awoken, by two antennae coming up over the bed, at the foot of the bed, sort of this long antenna coming over the top, and they actually belong to a rather large tailless whip scorpion, which gives me the heebie-jeebies. I don't know about you, but you'll see it on the video actually. So he got rather unceremoniously dumped on the floor in a matter of seconds. But anyway, the next day I was well enough to be able to hobble along a bit with my camera and my sketchbook. And you're not rightfully allowed to get too close to the chimps. This is actually the alpha male in a fig tree. You're not allowed to get too close because, of course, we're so genetically similar that any germs and diseases we have, we can pass on to them, and vice versa. However, this chap decided to leave his fig tree and come and see what this strange person was filming him. And he marched along, and I ended up being backed up against a boulder, so I couldn't move whether I'd like to or not. But anyway, I'll show you that in just a moment. I'm going to show the clip now, if that's all right. Just see if this works. I hope you enjoy the music. So this will be from Victoria Falls all the way up to the Chips.